Now the tables have turned. It's my turn to bring charges against you. Ophelia Lidania yawned, being charged for poisoning Her Majesty, Sitara, and attempted murder on Prince Ewout, on top of the crime of trying to conceal the will of His Majesty. As they asked if she had any last words, she told them she didn't care if this damned world came to an end. They then shot and killed her, and she'd wake up, younger, panting, trembling from the residual pain of the arrow fresh in her mind. She was so tired. This was already the 4th time she came back to life. The girl had been transmigrated into the body of Ophelia, the Villainess, in the coming-of-age novel, The Crown Prince's Return. According to the novel, half-sister Ophelia to the main character, Prince Ewout, confines him to a tower and murders his mother, and he returns by overcoming hardships, becoming emperor after defeating her. Since becoming Ophelia, she tried to change her fate. In her first life, she was kind to Ewout, giving him the throne early on, and had a happy marriage to the handsome extra, the future head of the Magic Tower, Kirsten Erhard. But she had no idea her husband, who was a powerless extra, plotted for her to become empress, and as a result, she'd be beheaded as a traitor. After that, she'd suddenly wake up 10 years younger than the day she was executed. Assuming she came back because she didn't live according to the original story, she started acting like how Ophelia did in the original story, becoming pompous and vicious. But still, no matter how cruel she acted, she'd come back. She was tired of suffering from the most brutal methods the prince would use to kill her every time. She just wanted to die in peace. Before she got killed again here in her 5th life, she was going to relinquish the throne to Ewout and find a way to die free from suffering. She had no idea how to do that though. She wished she could go back to when Sitara was alive. Sitara was a maid from a small village in the north, chosen by the emperor and the mother of Ewout. By the time Ophelia transmigrated, it was after she had already killed her. If Sitara was still alive, Ewout probably wouldn't despise her. Outside of that, the maids were absolutely terrified of her. Life as a villainess was hard. In the current timeline, it had been 1 year since Ophelia locked up Ewout. Her plan now was to make him think he should kill Ophelia mercifully. Ewout Lidania stared out at the window with his maid watching him. He told Shauna he wished to go outside with her on a sunny day like this. She thought he was such a sweet soul and shouted at him to remember Ophelia locked him in this place. She wanted the fact that she hated Ophelia to stay fresh in his mind. Bad timing. Ophelia arrived, and now Shauna and Ewout were nervous. Ophelia tried to greet him kindly, but Shauna was understandably on the fence. However, Ophelia would kneel down, offering him a way to get out. He assumed her intention was to kill him, because she did originally lock him up here. Shauna wanted to know why Ophelia had a change of heart, and how they could possibly trust her. To this, Ophelia turned on villainous mode, telling him their father has become a fool who couldn't tell the difference between today and tomorrow. He might even join Sitara soon. So, Ophelia was the only one who could save Ewout now. Poking him, she could see his strong and determined face. He had looked at her with deep hatred. That time he ordered her to the guillotine. Ophelia had set the wheels of fate in motion to ruin her life in the beginning of the novel. Sitara begged her for mercy, offering her life so that Ophelia would spare her son, and thus the official report would be that Sitara poisoned herself. When Ophelia told Ewout she wanted to get along in her first life, he probably thought she was playing tricks on him. So this time around, she still acted like a villainess, telling him the choice to leave was his own, if he wanted to follow her out. And so he did. He grabbed at her, asking to go along. He didn't know what she was thinking, but he didn't want to be locked in the tower anymore. He started to sob, and Ophelia could see he was smart and had a strong sense of self. She called him small and dirty, like a kitten, and then commanded her maid Amy to clean him up and make him presentable, although he argued he wasn't that dirty. They bathed him and provided fresh clothes. Now he was shining bright like a star. He was in awe seeing the beauty of the palace, while Shauna would warn him to be cautious, claiming Ophelia was dangerous. The royal siblings had an awkward brunch, where Ophelia told him they'd always have lunch together, unless something came up, and also that he had a lot to learn as prince. The maids couldn't believe Ophelia was acknowledging him, thinking maybe the world was coming to an end. But she'd crush him under the weight of expectations, telling him he'd have to learn history, etiquette, mathematics, and swordsmanship. He wondered if she was trying to kill him by not letting him sleep, but would be surprised to learn he'd be living in the Rose Palace, the same place his mother used to live, and from now on, he'd have personal maids. The meal was then interrupted by Ophelia learning Sir Kirsten Erhard was here. She was choking up just thinking about how she felt he was made for her when they first met, until he committed treason without her knowledge. She needed to avoid him at all costs. Ewout would pull her out of her daze by offering his silverware to use, since she dropped hers, and then run back to his side of the table. He wondered why he did that, but seeing she looked like she'd seen a ghost, he couldn't help it. He told her he could just eat with his hands, but then realized he'd definitely be stuck with the ill-mannered cat allegations. But now, he wanted to know who this Sir Kirsten was. Meanwhile, Kirsten was getting the message that Ophelia was unable to meet him due to having a cold, making him question if he'd done something wrong to her. Ewout wondered if Kirsten was a bad man, but Ophelia would respond that he wasn't. She described him as an exceptional mage who was called the future head of the magic tower, since the current one was missing. What was most exceptional about him, though, was his limitless mana. His power knew no end. Ophelia tried to keep herself composed. She was worried Ewout might remember Kirsten's visit, because if he got into trouble again, Ewout might also think she was involved in his schemes. She couldn't have Ewout be interested in the fact Kirsten came to visit her. She would distract him with an order he broke, letting him know she'd let it go for now. This whole event scared him into thinking Shauna was going to be executed, and everyone else sighed in relief that things turned out alright. She'd later be given a little teddy bear that got real big all of a sudden, because of the spell cast on it. It was a get-well-soon gift from Kirsten, who was insistent on coming back to meet her. Despite this, Ophelia replied in a nervous sweat that she wouldn't see him no matter how many times he'd visit. She ordered Kirsten's gifts be sent back, but it would always be one thing after another for Ophelia. She entered through the large creaking doors in the deepest part of the Sun Palace to visit her father. She hated visiting him. Despite her releasing Ewout, the wheezing, old emperor chastised Ophelia, reminding her he wanted Ewout as emperor, not her. She already knew that though. It's always been that way. His Majesty would die soon after this year, and in his will, he'd leave the throne to Ewout. The way he treated her, the way he called her heartless and cruel, wouldn't change to the end. In response, she'd play her part, rhetorically asking who she took after, since her mother was already dead. The emperor's hand with a chalice began to shake. It was about the time where he was going to splash what was inside all over her. It happened in her life where her heart was pierced in an arrow, in her life where she was dismembered, in her life where she was burned at the stake, even when she was accompanied by Ewout and Kirsten. However, this time, she'd avoid it instinctively. As her father coughed, he asked her if she was really going to kill her one and only brother. To this, she simply gave him another refilled cup and told him not to worry about Ewout, adding that she might die from his hands when the time came. She even brought up that Ewout would become emperor at the age of 20, exposing what was in store. But in response, her father would just call her delusional. Leaving, she tried to hold her tears back. It was hard for her to pretend like everything was okay. She commanded her head maid to find out who was reporting these outside rumors to her father, and if the maid didn't, she'd be taking her life. Ophelia didn't want to sound this cruel, but had no choice. She was human too, and the words from her father were too much to bear. Little did she know, it seems she had someone listening in on her. On another day, Ewout was nervous during his self-study. Ophelia was pouting because no one wanted to tutor him, since they were scared of her. Despite how busy she was handling her father's business, she decided to take on helping his studies, because anything would be better than her getting berated by her father again. With her offering to help his studies, there came an awkward silence. She wondered if what she said was too kind for Ophelia. Too late to take it back now. Remembering what he'd seen yesterday in the Sun Palace, Ewout didn't quite hear what Ophelia and the head maid were talking about, but could see her big sister was teary-eyed. He decided to suddenly ask her why she let him out of the tower and didn't want to kill him. Ophelia answered, "There's something you'll have to do for me in the future." But putting up this front, all he could see were her teary eyes in his mind. Later, while she sighed and lamented over her previous death, she was suddenly met with Amy bringing her a gift, a special glowing flower that only grew in the northern mountains, a barren place where dangerous monsters lived. She quickly figured out that this was a gift from Kirsten, along with the nightgown she was wearing, and the teddy bear was still in her room as well. Amy was practically glowing, saying Kirsten wanted to visit again. This gave Ophelia a bad feeling. She would later tell Amy to put on her casual clothes and have her follow her outside the palace. Amy knew things were intense between her lady and Sir Kirsten these days, but she didn't know what that had to do with her having to come on this adventure. If something happened to Her Highness, she was done for. If her toenails were damaged, Amy's father's side of her family would be executed. Oh no, with Ophelia's cloak ripping, her mother's side of the family would be executed. But now seeing Her Highness running into a man covered in blood in the slums, Amy wondered what on earth she could do to be forgiven. Making their way through the disheveled road, Ophelia bumped face first into the man, wondering what this firm feeling was that smelled fishy. He asked her what she was doing as she felt up on his rock-hard abs. And suddenly, she slipped backwards, but he caught her. While Ophelia was having a coughing fit, Amy tried to scold the man for talking to a noble lady so brashly. But to this, he'd respond it was so obvious that Ophelia knew what she was here for. This was the place where you could buy and sell people. All of the ads on the yellow posters were for human trafficking. Amy started to panic, but Ophelia would assure her she wouldn't be held responsible for anything. The man was taken aback a little, seeing Ophelia comfort a maid. He hadn't seen an aristocrat like this in a long time, but was now more surprised hearing Ophelia ask him to chat for 5 minutes. Now ignored them, telling them to go home, and returned to his little brother, happy to see him. The little brother noticed a nice flowery smell left on him, likely the residual smell left by Ophelia. Meanwhile, Ophelia would not be leaving. She would go to the Assassin's Guild, excited because now was the man she was looking to buy. She knew Now used to be the best assassin, but fell into poverty and became a guild slave. He was quite expensive, but more than worth the price. He was a significant character in the original story, and would be a big part of her plans going forward. Even blindfolded, he remembered Ophelia's fragrance, and as his master, she demanded to know why he was handed over covered in bruises. Now's voice was icy, and eyes were sharp. Having been an assassin most of his life, he developed a cynical personality and cold-blooded nature, while being surprisingly soft towards his little brother, whom he'd trade his life for. In the original story, Now was undoubtedly the most popular character. She wondered why they'd hand him over completely battered. Seeing him this way made her angry. He admitted it was under the instruction of the guild leader, his previous master. The leader didn't like that a powerful person chose and paid for him. She then told him to stop kneeling, knowing he could easily undo the restraints binding him. And removing his blindfold, she called him a good boy. He couldn't believe his new master was the woman from before, and that she was also the princess of the empire. He wondered why the princess would want him. He asked if he was bought to assassinate Ewout, and was unwilling to murder the imperial family. However, she'd instead tell him he'd assassinate her painlessly when the time came. That was her order. Despite him objecting due to lack of understanding, she assured him he would be set for life. She'd make it look like she killed herself, and prepared a shelter for him outside the country, plus ample payment with tons of jewelry. With this money, Now's brother wouldn't have to live in poverty anymore, and could even get a good education. She even offered to burn Now's contract of slavery, but he still refused, knowing murder of the imperial family was punished collectively. She couldn't believe this. In the original story, Now hated Ophelia more than anyone. He was always Ewout's right-hand man, and betrayed her. That's why she tried to keep him close, so it'd be easier to control him. He begged her to kill him now. He didn't want to trouble those who could get harmed because of him. Then suddenly, they got a knock at the door. Ewout was here to ask questions about his study material. Ophelia knew she needed to get Now on her side before he met Ewout, and now with him shirtless and covered in jewels she threw at him in attempts for convincing, this entire situation would definitely create misinterpretation. She ran out of the room to see her brother, and asked if he wanted to come with her to the festival in the capital, while putting up a sign that read, "Do not come in. If you do, you'll be beheaded." Now didn't know what to do with himself. While Ophelia and her brother enjoyed the bustle of the capital festival, she was looking to find Now's younger brother, Neu, who sold flowers and pickpocketed for a group of gangsters to make a living. She was considering taking Neu hostage and threatening Now. That way, he'd have no choice but to obey. Knowing Ewout was ecstatic to see everything, having been locked up in the tower his entire life, she handed him some cotton candy and told him he could run free and to have fun. He was glad Shauna gave him some money. He was going to use it to enjoy the festival as much as he wanted. But then he came upon the flower-selling boy. Returning back to his big sister, he gave her some flowers he bought as a thank you for taking care of him, even though she was busy. Shauna had told him that his sister was a mysterious danger, but for some reason, he didn't want to see her cry. The flowers definitely made her smile, and she patted his head. However, she'd suggest he study economics when they got home, since swapping his scarf for flowers wasn't a good idea. His scarf was worth 400 gold. He was flabbergasted to see it missing though, and now figured the boy he bought the flowers from had stolen it. Ewout went running back to where Neyu was, and saw him staggering, begging for help because he was being beaten by one of the gang members leading him. Ophelia knew the big guy was the bully on the street who took money from Neyu. She'd seen him a few times in her past lives as well. He made Neyu steal from other people and kept all the profit for himself. The man had the nerve to say that Neyu stole from him and then ran away. He was trying to take the scarf, but Neyu refused, believing his brother wouldn't have to do dangerous work anymore if he could sell it himself. Ophelia noticed Ewout was trembling and asked him what he wanted her to do. He answered that while stealing was wrong, he didn't believe it was right to let the boy suffer. He just wanted Neyu to be safe. So she snapped her fingers and summoned her guards to dispatch the thug, commanding them not to kill him, just teach him a lesson. Ewout had no idea the guards were following the whole time. She then offered her hand to Neyu and took him back to the palace. She promised now he was only asleep because he was tired, and that he was a good boy who'd do anything for his brother. Now was distraught seeing Neyu here, but now Ophelia had her wager to force him to obey. So he bowed and promised to kill her as she requested. She then tossed him a rare ring made of mana stones that he would wear to disguise himself, and from now on go under the alias of Villa. While putting it on, he asked why someone like her, who had everything, would want to die. But of course, she couldn't answer him clearly. About why you haven't liked this video or subscribed to my channel yet. Oh, you have? Good, because here at my Shoujo Weekly, I'll prove that you should. Because of all the incredible stories I have to share with you in the shoujo genre. I've got romance, reincarnation, and hot guys. Sometimes, I even get a little poetic. Ahem. So long lives shoujo, and I'll give shoujo to thee. Thou shalt hit thine page button and subscribe to me. On another day, Ophelia explained Neyu was officially employed here and wanted her brother to get along with him. She then introduced her new servant Philip, whose disguise was incredible, except it couldn't hide his threatening aura. She had to poke him, whispering reminders that he was supposed to play his servant role better. He apologized since he wasn't used to it yet. Winter followed the festival, and after the emperor's death, the original story begins in earnest. Her dying wasn't going to change, but she was going to make sure she would be killed peacefully by now before Ewout could kill her. Making their way to the fields, now asked her what happened to his brother, since it didn't look like he was being held hostage. So she explained she simply hired him as Ewout's friend and paid him with the promise he'd receive so much money his big brother would never have to work again. Now began to clench his teeth, saying if she threatened Neyu, but she retorted quickly that if his threat was killing her, that'd be perfect. He wished she'd take him more seriously. She was then suddenly met with magical smoke, and now took guard of her quickly. He shouted, asking who would dare threaten her highness. But what appeared before them was a cute little bunny. In fact, the whole field was filling with rabbits. Turns out, Sir Kirsten had stopped by again, and cast a spell while she was out at the festival. Now was then suddenly tackled by a bunny, and he felt like they should go get this guy and beat him at once. Ophelia knew Kirsten wouldn't give up trying to visit her, and he'd get people's attention by giving her lots of expensive gifts, and everyone would soon be talking about it. Ugh, she was so annoyed by him. She then decided to take a trip to Erhard Manor, where shocked and shirtless, he'd be surprised by her sudden visit. She wondered if coming here was a mistake. She was rethinking, maybe she should have ignored him, but maybe that would have made him madder. She tried thinking of what Kirsten was really like. Besides being her ex-husband and the future head of the magic tower, the only thing she remembered was him being obsessed with her becoming empress. He came running in, dripping wet, to see her, telling her he would have gone to the palace if she had told him. She thought he was so devious, hiding his yearning for more power through good acts. She was requesting a favor of his older brother, Arsad, who was completely flabbergasted. Arsad was good at martial arts, and she wanted him to be the prince's sword instructor. Kirsten was wondering if that was really all she came here for. He asked that she reveal her true intention, but nope, she was going to take her leave. He couldn't believe this. He broke out in laughter, giving up for the night, offering to do whatever she wanted. She knew he wouldn't tell her anything. He was a cunning man, so she instead requested him to become Ewout's tutor as a way to keep him by her side to control him. She then pulled out the lavender flowers she received from Ewout and requested he use preservation magic on them, and he did. She felt a warm light emit, just like it did every time he used magic. She then told him to stop sending her rare gifts, but he assured her she deserved them, since she was Imperial Princess, and that she was invaluable and could not be compared to someone who only had a single pathetic flower to offer her. The Imperial Cabinet meeting was quite daunting for Ophelia. Her maternal grandfather, Duke Sackart, reminded her that now that she was back, From the festival, she needed to take care of Empire business. Groups of healers have been going around the slums a lot recently, cutting people's flesh open with blades and stitching them up to treat them. They demanded she remove them because treatment needed to be done at the temple with the powers of the divine priest. She knew this meant that only the wealthy and noblemen could get treatment if she did that though. This was a growing amount of discussion in favor of nobles. Meanwhile, Ewout was caught hiding from his history lessons with Kirsten. He couldn't believe the man whose name shocked his sister so much was his tutor. He wanted to ask Ophelia herself about him, but he hadn't seen her since the festival. And observing Neyu, he wondered if Neyu was Ophelia's half-brother, and if she was trying to make the two of them compete with each other to get rid of the weaker one. He felt sick and decided to leave his lesson. Heading to where he was going to have lunch with Ophelia, he saw the flowers he gifted her set in the center, and learned preservation magic was used to keep them alive, but would be unexpectedly met with Neyu having lunch with him instead. Since Ophelia was busy, she had gotten stopped by her grandfather and Arsad. Before her grandfather could talk to her further, she'd get Arsad to escort her away, since he mentioned the high priest wanted her to visit the temple. Placing his jacket on her because of the cold wind, it was clear he didn't have a good understanding of politics. The people would surely spread rumors about the two of them. He got flustered, trying to explain he wasn't attempting to impress her in any way, and apologized. All he did most days since being a child was hone the sword. High society was too difficult for him. Meeting with the high priest, she knew it. He wanted to put an end to the healers, mischaracterizing them as people who cut others up and watched them bleed. She would surprise him by saying the Imperial Palace was going to support the healers. Even knowing this would receive severe backlash, she made it evident she didn't care. But just as surprisingly, he would respond that he believed she was a good person. Her heart then became distraught with throbs. Hearing Arsad praise her for secretly being a good person, she felt sleepy. She learned the tea she was drinking was infused with a medicine that relieves fatigue, and stared at it. She could see her repressed feelings from the past reflected. It made her remember she used to cry constantly, asking why her. She never did any of the things she was accused of. She also felt bad for Ewout, who lived his life trapped in the tower until now, and as she passed out, someone was watching her from below. While Ophelia was taking her leave, Isaac Belhareven was getting shouted at by the people to stop his advance. They couldn't believe a commoner like him had the audacity to slap the only son of a duke from the academy who spoke 3 languages. Meanwhile, Ophelia was strolling back, thinking Ewout and Neyu had a lot of fun together at lunch, since they were best friends in the original story. But she wasn't expecting to see him seething and Neyu shaking. Ewout was at first a little angry, thinking his sister wouldn't come even though she promised to always have lunch with him, and then felt relief. Seeing her, he realized she didn't forget, which would quickly get ruined with her telling him, "Neyu's a good kid, isn't he?" She offered to let them skip afternoon lessons for tea together, but Ewout stormed off, rejecting the offer with the excuse of having to do homework. Neyu sighed, insinuating that Ewout was probably jealous. He apparently wanted to see her and kept looking at Neyu the entire time while pouting. Neyu was incredibly matter-of-fact, telling Ophelia the best way to find out how Ewout felt was probably asking him. She couldn't believe Neyu was really just a 10-year-old boy. She felt frustrated. She thought about the risks and made sure everything was under control. And now with Kirsten bothering her, he was just making things worse. He didn't have any classes to teach right now, since it was Arsad's turn, and was trying to flirt with Ophelia. With her rejecting his bouquet gift, he turned it into flying doves, and questioned why she was only cold towards him. He was just trying to put a smile on her face. She got serious though, asking him why he kept coming to see her. He then suddenly pulled her in close, and with a sad look on his face, he began to tell her the reason. But before he could answer, his head started throbbing, and he clenched her wrist so hard, it hurt her. He apologized, snapping his finger to teleport out. She'd never seen him in pain like this. He'd always been healthy each time she was reborn. She had no idea what was going on anymore. In the original story, Ewout's childhood was described dismally. He was so lonely that each day hurt like he was swallowing large chunks of ice. Even if true that love-starved Ewout was jealous of Neyu, she would never let him in. Rubbing his head in his sleep, she saw tears dripping down his face as he uttered, Mom? Yesterday, he had some really vivid and good dreams. He stumbled upon Ophelia sleeping and mistakenly thought something was wrong, wondering if she was still breathing. He fell back as she woke up, and she asked him what was the matter, and that if he was worried about anything, he should talk to Neyu. He wondered why she was bringing him up again, feeling a pain in his heart. She could see it now. She then told him if he had a friend, his heart may hurt a little less, because she couldn't be too nice to him, just like he couldn't be too nice to her. But regardless, since he was her brother, he was the person closest to her. Heading back to class now, he had no idea she thought of him as her brother, much less the person who was closest to her, and wondered if she also felt unbearable pain in her heart too. When you look at the long history of the Empire, you'll see that family members who once loved each other ended up fighting. People who were once enemies became friends. As Kirsten taught Ewout history, the young boy became fixated on his teacher saying, "There's more than meets the eye," thinking more and more that his sister carried a deep weight in her heart. Kirsten then decided to end the general knowledge portion and have them take a break. The two young boys enjoyed their sweets, especially Neyu, who didn't really have access to them where he lived, being poor and all. Kirsten attributed everything good to Ophelia's peaceful reign, adding that her legislative management skills were impressive, as if she were born ahead of her time. The two young boys both thought she was perfect. Ewout especially surprised hearing Neyu say it looked like she was about to vanish, and that she was always looking off to the distance. Ewout realized he and Neyu thought more alike than he originally thought. Kirsten was shocked, hearing Ewout ask him if Ophelia had a friend she could talk to. So shocked, he accidentally tossed the curriculum papers he was holding all over. Kirsten believed she did have someone to talk to, and his name was Isaac Belhareven. At the church, the head priest was scolding Priest Isaac at this very moment because of his ridiculous outfit. However, Isaac would resign being a priest here and now to do work as a healer. The workers at the church got the outfit off of him, and the head priest wondered how he ended up taking on a troublemaker like Isaac so late in his life. He was willing to hear Isaac out though. Knowing there was nothing he could do to stop the boy, he requested Isaac at least visit Her Highness Ophelia before resigning completely. Isaac didn't want to at first, considering he hated the palace, but the head priest assured him she was the only person in the whole country who protected the healers, and wanted Isaac to at least reassure her he would do well. Isaac scoffed, beginning his leave. The head priest had no idea where Isaac got his temper from, but no one else had as much divine power as he did. He would have been perfect to take over as head priest. Kirsten was reviewing Ewout's homework, asking if he truly understood what he meant about there being more than meets the eye. He brought up the rumor that Ophelia had killed Ewout's mother. However, Ewout never gave that any thought, having been imprisoned most of his life. Things were getting tense between the two, and Neyu wanted no part of it. Neyu didn't think life was going to be easy in the palace. He still received letters from his brother occasionally, warning him not to befriend anyone there. Ewout was cold to him all the time. It made him miss his brother, who raised him after their parents died, and still worked hard to this day. He had no idea Now was always watching him as Philip, though. Now bumped into his brother, leaving chocolate in his pocket. Neyu had no idea who left it there, but munched on it anyway. Things started to change for him when Kirsten arrived. Though Kirsten's advances towards Ophelia only made her avoid him blatantly, he didn't hate his teacher because he looked like he was hurting somewhere. But now seeing Kirsten's eye color clearly, Neyu ran off, bumping into Ophelia. He explained that Kirsten was likely possessed by demons. That's what the old lady next door told him anyway. Eyes were the windows to the soul, and only demons had the ability to change eye color. He also heard only a priest could fight the demons off. She just bonked his head, letting him know he should concentrate on his studies more. And then he thought he sounded kinda stupid. Surely there was no such thing as demons. Interrupting him though, Isaac would arrive with a scowling face. Ophelia had this matter to attend to first. Greeting him, she noticed he wasn't bowing or showing any signs of submission to her, the notorious princess. However, she would use him for an effective plan. No matter what distraction or annoyance Kirsten might cause, she was going to have Isaac make her a paralyzing potion. She didn't know how she'd die this time, cut up, hung, or set aflame, but any pain she might feel would disappear using that potion. She was going to earn Isaac's trust and get it. She planned everything to make a good impression on him, and wasn't going to let him leave until he made the potion for her. He found it odd that she knew his name, considering this was the first time they ever met. So she made the excuse that she knew everyone who entered the palace. And while he accepted the answer, he seemed pretty skeptical. His first order of business was evaluating both Ewout and Neyu's height and weight, deeming both on the smaller side compared to other boys their age. He recommended if they ate well, got enough rest, and played outside, they'd catch up in no time. Ophelia then pulled Isaac away for a private convo, and the maids assumed he was her secret lover. She asked him for the paralyzing potion, but he was assuming she was secretly asking for a deadly one, and coldly responded he would not help her kill other people. He was willing to accept whatever punishment she saw fit for denying her orders. While at the same time, the maids were still speculating over spreading word that Ophelia had a private encounter with a man at the temple. They heard the man in question was handsome and had lightly colored hair, believing it had to be Father Isaac. Ewout wanted them to stop spreading rumors about his sister, and asked Philip to chime in. He didn't really care, but suggested maybe she was getting married soon. Ewout was shocked by the idea. Kirsten then came by, promising there were always these kinds of rumors circulating, and to think nothing of them. But now he wanted to know where the princess and her alleged boyfriend were. He was shocked, seeing her stand beside Isaac. She was assuring Isaac she did not want deadly poison, just a paralyzing one. And Kirsten ran in front of her suddenly, calling Isaac uncouth, and that he should make the poison for her if that was her order. Kirsten was angry, trying to escort Ophelia away to make the poison at her request, but she pulled away, asking why he would do that for her, reminding him she did not say he could speak on her behalf. He even touched the spot she was still bruised from. Now he was distraught. His eyes made her wonder if he had returned from a previous life as well, since the color of his eyes never changed in any of her other lives, and he unexpectedly sought her out this time, even though they should be strangers. Taking her leave for now, she ordered Isaac to stay at the palace to chat with her later. Kirsten was hurting, wondering if he was really someone she had to put up with and tolerate. The answer was obvious for her. Days later, Now would bring up that Kirsten was pretty sad. She wasn't exactly feeling great either. They used to be married, after all. Apparently, one of the new maids heard sobbing coming from Kirsten's room, and his older brother had been begging him to come out and talk. Kirsten would later show up to apologize to Ophelia, admitting his actions probably seemed strange. He didn't understand either, but felt a strong urge inside that told him he must support her to the best of his ability and devote his entire being to her. Even though she already had someone by her side, he wouldn't give up trying to become that person. He considered lying to her about his feelings, but knew making a commitment he couldn't keep would only make her angrier. She couldn't believe this. Arsad often scolded her, telling her not to act like an immature child. But here Kirsten was, acting nervous and embarrassed right now. When they first met, he was the greatest mage in the Empire, and since he was older than her, she found it difficult to talk to him. She started laughing. She couldn't believe Arsad reprimanded his younger brother for acting like a brat. She began to smile, thinking maybe she was only getting to know the real Kirsten now. She took her leave, and that's when Kirsten became fierce, telling Isaac to come out and stop hiding, since he was allegedly Ophelia's lover. Kirsten didn't want him cowering and hiding like a rat. But Isaac had no idea what he was talking about. Now the maids were clamoring over gossip. A bloody fight for the flower of the Imperial Empire. A fight in the Rose Garden between Sir Kirsten and Father Isaac for Ophelia. One of them heard Sir Kirsten sent Isaac flying through the air using magic. But with Ophelia now overhearing them, she thought maybe she should increase their workload so heavily they wouldn't have time to gossip. But now seeing Isaac with a beaten face, she wondered if the rumors were true. He explained they didn't fight, and that he wouldn't waste his time doing useless things. So she responded that she believed him, and while he wouldn't pick a fight, she knew he wouldn't back down if someone started one either. He thought it was strange that she spoke as though she knew him well. Recounting the event the other day, Kirsten dragged Isaac by his clothing. He didn't like how rude Isaac was to Ophelia, and Isaac took note of this. If Ophelia was as notoriously evil as the rumors said, he wondered why there were people who cared so deeply for her, like Kirsten. Still, he was willing to hear her out in regards to wanting a paralyzing potion, an anesthetic, a potion that would make her feel nothing when she drank it herself. He could now see a genuineness in her eyes from up close. She looked like someone who escaped pain, a look that resembled sick people pleading for God's mercy in front of the temple, and decided to trust her this time, accepting to help in making the potion for her. Okay, but if he didn't fight with Kirsten, she still wondered what happened to his face. Turns out, he found rare herbs in the Imperial Garden, and stole a lot of Imperial property. After leaving Isaac's new lab setup, Now was outside, ready to escort her safely. He took her safety seriously, even knowing he was to take her life one day. He needed her to stay safe until then, because under her protection, Neyu was happy. Embarrassing for him to admit, it was only here that he was able to see his little brother genuinely happy for the first time. And he heard she was the one that requested he and Neyu share the same room. She was taken aback, seeing Now reverted back to his original appearance as he knelt down to kiss her hand, thanking her. Seeing his thick chest bulging out of his shirt, She stuttered, asking him to fix his clothes. And so, he walked away, going to tidy himself up. She didn't realize Isaac had been watching the whole time though, and gave a bright good evening wave, having no idea Now was around the corner, heart beating rapidly, and face flushed from their earlier interaction. While taking his evening bath, Shauna was reminding the prince he needed to get revenge on Ophelia by killing her in a cruel way because she killed his mother. However, internally, he could only see her bright, smiling face, holding the flowers he gave her. During the day, she was sighing as her grandfather suggested setting her up with someone. He wanted to choose someone for her based on his years of experience. Right now, the Empire was being split in two. There was the existing faction that supported her, and the new one that was trying to elevate Prince Ewout. He wasn't happy that she took him out of the prison tower, especially with Ewout being an illegitimate child, while their own family had a long time of ties to royalty. He was furious, calling her by full name, demanding she expand her influence through marriage, since she was next to be reigning empress. After the queen consort died, he was the only one who protected her from the emperor's abuse. He didn't want to let the love child Ewout take over her empire. He suddenly cuffed her to the table and was now having her taken away to the man he picked out for her. She was really hoping her date wouldn't be Kirsten, but of course, her hopes would be crushed. We turned to Ewout and Neyu during sword training. Ewout wanted Neyu to stop complaining and asked if his parents were aware he was here. Neyu responded that he didn't have any parents, and brought up how his highness was probably a spoiled brat with an important birth. He was sarcastic, saying he was incredibly jealous of Ewout's blessed life. Through a small conversation, Ewout learned of a painter Neyu knew back in town who could paint anything just from someone's memory, and decided they should sneak out and employ the painter, having no idea someone was listening in on them from a tree above. Kirsten couldn't resist the date set up by Duke Sackart, considering House Erhard was a newer noble family, wanting to cement their standing in the Empire. The proposal was actually first made to Arsad, since he was the eldest son, but he was too flustered by the idea, so Kirsten showed up in his place. Before they began, Kirsten removed the shackle from Ophelia's leg. She couldn't deny he was extremely talented, breaking it while making sure she didn't get hurt in the process. But now that she was free, she tried to escape, but he'd then jump and grovel at her feet, begging that she at least have a cup of tea with him. She was still intent on leaving though, so he instead bent down one knee before her, letting her know if there was a fight for who would sit on the throne, House Erhard would back her all the way. She didn't have time for this. She called for Philip and Amy to check on Ewout, who could be in danger of kidnapping since he was still the prince. She was right to suggest that, considering he and Neyu had snuck out of the palace at this very moment. Neyu had stolen tons of jewels, thinking he now had more than enough for his brother to never have to work again. Neyu led Ewout to where the mysterious painter was, and the prince felt pretty uneasy here. Inside the tent, the so-called painter told Ewout to close his eyes and think deeply about the person he missed. He imagined his mother, but also Ophelia. The painter would tell him to keep concentrating on his mother. However, the crystal ball clearly reflected his sister. No matter how hard he tried, he could only faintly remember Sitara, while his sister's smiles were much more clear in his mind. Her smiling, asking him if he wanted to get out of the tower. He knew he needed to stop thinking about her because he was going to get revenge on her at some point. Then suddenly, a masked man would capture Neyu, asking how much longer they'd have to wait, calling his goons to capture Ewout right now. Neyu would bite his way out, telling Ewout to run, and now the prince could see the man trying to knock out Neyu was the thug from before. With more men coming in, Ewout picked up a plank, wondering if he could defeat them all on his own. He thought no one would come to save them, and his thoughts of Ophelia grew even stronger. Then, suddenly, Father Isaac would come to the rescue, wondering if he knocked out the thug a little too hard. He was the one who watched them from above the tree earlier. The other thug tossed Neyu aside, telling Isaac there was a clear difference in strength between the two. He socked Isaac, not knowing he was right about a difference in strength, because with a single gut-wrenching punch from Isaac knocking him out, it was clear the priest was much stronger. Isaac looked at the thugs and uttered, maybe about 10. Ewout was nervous, wondering if they could really take on 10 thugs, especially since he could only see 4. This was a misinterpretation though. Isaac was considering how many beatings it would take to get rid of them. 10 was his guess, but he'd definitely do more if necessary. Meanwhile, now traced small footprints, believing they were Ewout's leaving the palace. Ophelia decided she wanted to go find him herself, thinking Neyu might have sold her brother out. Kirsten would stop her, expressing his worry, considering she was being accompanied by Now. He could tell Now was a killer, and wanted to know why she was concealing his identity by using a magic ring to alter his appearance. prince. They reached the tent, and looking inside, they found that Isaac had already resolved the situation. Isaac explained anyone could fight if they knew the basic theory of it, and since healers researched human anatomy, he could pinpoint weak spots easily. Now was suspicious of the painter, and instantly stabbed them multiple times, exposing that they were the one who likely set this whole thing up. But being met with a bright flash, Ewout would suddenly hear the ringing of a bell, and she would explain her working with the thugs was completely coincidental. And now that her portrait of Ewout's mother was finished, she was going to have the prince pay a price in return. With Ophelia and Kirsten entering the tent soon after, it was completely empty. He could tell they were being hidden via a magic barrier. He was going to take action, and this would leave her blushing, calling him the greatest mage in the Empire. He was trembling with excitement, but this was all in his imagination. She suddenly figured out there was some kind of magical barrier, using the context clue of Philip disappearing too quickly to relocate with teleportation magic. She now needed Kirsten to do something for her. The painter assured Ewout only the two of them had made a pact, and that his friends were safe, but she could use magic to ensure they'd never wake up. What the painter wanted in exchange for the portrait was Philip's ring. Ewout was hesitant, knowing his sister gave it to Philip personally. The painter then used magic to spin Ewout in the air, remarking that he was strangely submissive to her highness. Wasn't she supposed to be his enemy? She then went berserk, diving to dissect his head, but they'd be interrupted with Ophelia using a sword and Kirsten's help to smash open the barrier. The painter laughed, explaining she planted a small bomb inside the prince's head. She began taking her leave, not wanting to deal with the Imperial Guards and the next head of the magic tower all at the same time. Ophelia had to run to catch Ewout, and the mysterious woman wished to see the beautiful princess again next time, before disappearing into an explosive light. On another day, Ewout apologized to his sister for sneaking out. Ophelia told him it was okay, since it was the first bad thing he'd done in his life, but he assumed she had no idea he still had his mother's portrait drawn. Except she did. She handed it back to him, explaining she found it in the painter's tent. She wanted him to take it, since it seemed important to him. Isaac and Kirsten appeared behind her, telling her she was being too shy, and that she could admit her desire to be more affectionate towards her brother. The two guys gave their report on Ewout's body, finding no issues with his mana flow and only minor abrasions. So, Ophelia determined it must be a type of psychological magic. That was a relief to her, knowing the effects of something like that were usually only temporary. She wanted to do more research and requested Isaac to bring her another magic book, but he refused. Checking her forehead temperature, he got her flustered, but could tell she had a slight fever. Watching them interact was making Kirsten snap on the inside. He suddenly summoned intimidating-looking magic that could relieve her exhaustion, but for some reason, it only bounced off of her. The two guys weren't expecting that. Elsewhere, Ewout's head was throbbing. Since that incident, he sometimes heard voices of his mother, begging Ophelia not to kill him. Father Isaac then appeared with tea, and Neu was thankful, since it looked like Ewout was in a lot of pain. Ewout was struggling. Even without hearing these voices, he already hated Ophelia. But now, weeping with tears, he wondered why she made it so impossible for him to hate her. The painter realized the magic had worn off now. Prince Ewout was able to sort through his thoughts. As expected, the prince's supporters were behind this kidnapping, even though it looked like Neu sold off the prince. Now was begging Ophelia to punish his brother lightly, interrupting the maids changing her. He told her to kill him instead. At that moment, she thought it was the perfect time to prank him. She told him that Neu couldn't be unpunished for committing such a heinous crime. She didn't need Now to die. Tossing her hairbrush onto the ground, she pointed at it, making him think he'd have to clean the whole palace with it. And that's how the incident with the painter ended. One thing left unresolved for her was the fact that the painter wanted Now's ring. She wondered why. The boys wanted her to forgive Philip from cleaning duties, since it looked like he was going to fall. And after he cleaned for a few minutes, she was actually going to let it go. But she didn't stop, wanting to admire his impressive athletic ability. Ewout decided to get up, wanting to save Philip, who was a dear friend to him. Ophelia was glad her brother opened up to her more these days, likely because she gave the portrait back to him. But, making their way to get Philip down, Isaac would stop her, saying he needed to investigate her unusual condition further, telling her to come by the lab sometime. The fact that magic didn't work on her shouldn't be ignored, but she told him to shush, telling him it wasn't a big deal. So he accepted her way. Turning away from him, she was blushing. Ever since that day he checked her forehead, she's become much more aware of him. Maybe because he shielded Ewout and Neu from the painter. Perhaps she was feeling indebted to him. But now, noticing he was staring at her intently, she caused her and the boys to fall over. She was so embarrassed. He told her, "This is what happens when you avoid me. No matter how upset you are that I touched your forehead yesterday, remember that I am a priest and that I was checking for a fever. If it means checking on your health, I will need to touch you several times in the future. Don't avoid me." Wow, this only made her even more of a mess. She shouted that she wasn't avoiding him, and that even if she was, it was her right. Ewout had no idea someone could be so assertive towards his sister. He wanted to be just like Father Isaac when he was older. He then wondered if she was sick and could feel her hand was hot. That evening though, Kirsten was torturing someone, ripping their teeth out to get more information about the painter. Ophelia had no idea that the high priest's best pupil had such delicate eyelashes, rosy cheeks, and skin with a soft, clean scent. He wondered why she was staring so intently, and oh no, she realized she couldn't take her eyes off of him. Trying to maintain her distance from Isaac, she took her leave, causing him to accidentally knock some beakers over, creating an explosive smoke that he would dive on top of to keep her covered. The gas was dangerous, and he needed to keep her from inhaling it in this interesting position for the time being. In her mind, his frame was so sturdy. The gas hurt, but every now and then, she caught a whiff of Isaac's scent. She needed to calm down. She needed to go somewhere she wouldn't feel strange, and chest didn't feel as heavy any place away from him. After some time, she was able to finally escape. Isaac also wondered what was wrong with him lately. He couldn't sleep well and kept making mistakes. He thought about visiting the temple or something. The head priest was quite surprised, seeing two people who were very difficult to meet, paying the temple a visit on the same day. Isaac gulped seeing the princess, and trying to leave, the head priest wasn't going to let him. She told the head priest it was fine, thinking it'd actually be better for her if Isaac got away. Inside, she was about to hear Isaac's past from the head priest. A past she'd never known about through all of her previous lives. However, they'd be interrupted by Count Rewell, causing a commotion, claiming he'd been disrespected by the temple despite how much he's donated. Hearing the high priest wasn't here, he demanded to speak to Isaac, since he was the best student. And seeing him below, Ophelia thought of him as a priest with a breath warmer than a spring wind, a priest who was actually sweeter than he appeared. She wondered if it was common for him, a man who received affection from the high priest and love from God, to make such a violent face. In this instance, where the count was calling Isaac low-born, the priest simply walked away. Ophelia was glad nothing happened. Later, in disguise, she learned from the other priests that the count would beat them during this time of year. When seasons changed, the family members of House Rewell caught colds, so any priest could pay a visit and use their divine powers to heal, but the count was very stubborn and demanded that the family be treated by the high priest. However, that went against temple rules. The high priest only treated the imperial family, but that was just a part of the custom. He didn't technically need to refuse the count. But if the high priest treated them, he'd be accused of treason, so the situation was a bit tricky. The priest suddenly realized she was Princess Ophelia, and heading into her carriage, the count was graceful towards her, telling her it was an honor meeting her here, and that it seemed nothing was capable of hiding her immense dignity. She ignored him, leaving them all behind, where back at home, she thought of how all the high-ranking aristocrats were so sly, it disgusted her. The count gave such an overboard farewell with the priests watching, she could tell he was pressuring her into letting the high priest treat his family, or make Isaac do it. Beside her while eating, Isaac would tell her she shouldn't just munch on cookies. She should consume the recommended daily calorie intake for her health. However, she could see his burger with 110 grams of fat and 2,020 calories was definitely exceeding his. He felt a lot better after eating, and climbing the ledge, he told Ophelia to stand back. He then leapt at her as his way of getting exercise. Landing hunched over her, she started smacking him over and over, calling him an idiot and telling him to never do that again, or she'd have him executed. And to this, he'd smile, saying, "But wasn't my jump amazing? It was to the point where you temporarily forgot about your concerns and worries." She was blushing at this moment, and that's when it dawned on her. Whenever she saw him, there was always a sense of unease and longing. That's because she admired his selfless attitude towards others. It was a genuine kindness she had lost at some point. Opening his heart to her, he explained his father was a healer who treated an aristocrat, just like Count Rewell. They reported him to the temple, and his father was put to death. He was only telling her this because she seemed bothered after her temple visit. Telling her made him feel much better, and for some reason, he wanted to tell her everything. Thinking about how much Isaac had been through, she could tell he wished to escape this place and go far away. she didn't want him to lose his kindness, and offered to let him heal far more people than he could have ever imagined. She pointed to an empty lot in the city where a big fire happened. She wanted to establish a massive medical institution there and have him run it. She was going to legalize healers and have a system to set up capable ones to expand the poor's access to healthcare. As a trial run, she wanted him to run a small health clinic near Old Town. He asked if that meant he'd be leaving the Imperial Palace, and she made the excuse that having to interact with a large number of people was a great way to aid his efforts in developing new anesthetics. She would crush any opposition to preserve Isaac's heart for others. She crushed all of her opposers at the Imperial Cabinet meeting using logic. She would even allow the High Priest to treat those not of the Imperial family, but the commoners and poor would have priority. The Count would then turn to groveling at her feet, begging her to have mercy. The ailment his family was suffering was not just a mere cold, and he couldn't bear to tell the truth, so he had kept it a secret. Isaac, meanwhile, was busy running the clinic. He would then get interrupted by his fellow priests, here to degrade him for being such a saint, working as a healer. One of the priests brought up that the temple had authority over all healing, and even the high priest, who doted over Isaac, wouldn't be able to help him here. The priest then told all the people here to receive treatment to leave. Another one of the priests hit their rude associate. They actually got word from the temple that Isaac set up a treatment facility near the slums and decided they wanted to help. The priests were shocked at first, but after thinking about it, they felt Isaac was doing the right thing. And so, Isaac took them in. Since the more workers, the better. Working together, the other priests were surprised to hear this clinic was Ophelia's idea. There were many negative rumors about her, but they were interested in seeing how the world would change once she became empress. Ophelia was researching everything she could involving what ailed the Rewell family. The Count's explanation was a mess, but none of the symptoms he mentioned were in any written sources. She had a really bad feeling, considering this type of illness wasn't in any of her previous lives. Did it have to do with Kirsten asking for time off after the painter incident? He said he wanted to start researching magic more, but ever since, she hadn't seen him at all. He never listened when she told him to leave her alone, so why the sudden change of heart? She was suddenly surprised by Now, who knew even though he wasn't her first choice, he'd always make himself available to her. She explained she was heading to Rewell Manor, taking the longer bridge route. That way, she could see the empty lot, where the medical institution would be built in the future. But by passing, she noticed strange wildflowers growing, along with a familiar silhouette. She inferred it to be Kirsten, but she decided she'd deal with him later. Arriving, Now was concerned, since word had spread about the people of the manor having a contagious illness. With Ophelia presuming the illness was probably magic-based, she felt no need to explain she was immune to magic, since it would just complicate things, and made the simple excuse of, "A person with my level of absolute power doesn't contract illnesses. Oh ho ho." Meeting with the Count, he seemed dark, haggard, and brooding, telling them they wouldn't be able to do anything without the High Priest. So, she retorted she heard the symptoms appeared after the sunset. That's why she's come to check on things now. She left Now outside, not wanting to explain her complicated immunity, with the excuse he needed to look after Neu and couldn't afford to lose his life. And now that the Count was shaking, trembling, coughing up the most disgusting black goo, the Count bid Now to do what Her Highness said. However, while the Princess and Count would make their way in, the goo was already slithering on Now, telling him to come inside the manor and stay with them. Entering in, it was a horror scene, with the family and servants floating up to the ceiling. The Count begged Ophelia not to look at them right now. They were still his precious family. Once the sun rose, they always told him they never remembered what happened the night before. He quickly slashed some goo approaching them, forcing it to retreat. Knowing the disease might be magical, he once employed a mage to examine the manor, but all the mage did was leave, and said the phenomenon fell under the temple's jurisdiction. Making it to his grandson's room, they were met with the High Priest. The Count was so relieved to see him, and believed his family was saved, leaving the princess and priest to take care of everything. She suspected this was Now in disguise though, but noticed the mana ring wasn't on his finger. A monstrous tentacle with a teddy bear slithered up behind Ophelia's back, and with it growing larger, the High Priest warned her to stay still and not turn around. The priest suddenly grabbed Ophelia, kicking the monster away from them, and ran off, then transformed into Now once they left the building. Turns out, he had kept the mana ring in his mouth, afraid she would have thrown it out if she saw it on his finger. Apparently, it worked as long as it made contact with him anywhere on his body. Putting that aside, Ophelia felt something was wrong. Why was Count Rewell the only one who stayed sane and able to call for help in this situation? It was as if the manor was trying to lure someone inside. Now then started acting strange. telling her over and over they needed to stay here. She could now see the monster had taken over his body, as he was telling her if she listened to him, she could die now instead of years later. She begged him to stop, but he just kept screaming at her for them to go inside the manor right now, because they were calling for her. Then suddenly, a warm light emitted, a light Ophelia was very familiar with. It was Kirsten, reaching towards her with different eye colors than she was used to. Passing out with tears on her face, he gave her a light kiss and dragged the two of them out. She woke up in her bed, thinking she had died and was restarting another life. But seeing now, she tripped over, realizing that wasn't the case. He wondered if he had done something wrong, only remembering up to the point where they were talking about the ring, but she told him not to worry anymore. Ewout and Neu then came rushing towards her, worried because they heard she returned unconscious last night. They wanted her to be more conscious of her safety. Then suddenly, she'd see a vision of Ewout stabbing her violently in the future, telling her he'd never forgive her, and she fell over in pain from the psychological trauma. She'd then end up being sick for the next 3 days, and seeing Ophelia trying to work, Amy had to confiscate her papers and tell her to rest. Later, she went out in disguise, finding Arsad dressed like a farmer. He was more accustomed to these clothes, since House Erhard only had a little bit of land prior to Kirsten being named the next head of the Magic Tower. Chatting with him, she learned Kirsten wasn't actually working at the Magic Tower the entire time, and that he'd supposedly been entrusted with her secret orders. But of course, she never gave Kirsten any orders like that. Now she had a very strong suspicion Kirsten was somehow connected to every incident she'd been experiencing recently. She then decided to return to Rewell Manor, surprised to find Isaac there, since she called for the High Priest. Thanks to her, there were a lot more people helping at the medical facility, so he was able to take some time away to help her here. He joked, saying that forcing the elderly High Priest to travel back and forth when his knees were already in poor condition was abuse. Then, now arrived on carriage, carrying Amy, Ewout, and Neu, who were all worried about her since Ophelia snuck out of the palace. Could now feel Isaac's intimidating presence with his divine power activated. He wondered how Ophelia wasn't being affected by Isaac's pressure. Inside, the Count presented his smiling grandson, Eugene, who had the most severe symptoms. The boy was bright and chatty, telling Her Highness she was beautiful and pointing out her soft scent. Now whispered to Ophelia, telling her to stay away from him. He was the boy who was in the room where the monster came out the other night. However, Isaac would suddenly walk past her and ask Eugene to hold his hand. Touching it, the whole mansion was engulfed in Isaac's divine power, and Eugene didn't see anything scary anymore. Isaac told him that it was alright to stop pretending everything was fine, but the teary-eyed Eugene responded, "Not yet." He wanted to make sure his other family members were better first. Isaac just smiled, patting his head, telling the boy he'd keep that in mind. Hearing Isaac knew how to treat everyone here, the grandfather and grandson embraced each other with feelings of relief. Eventually, Isaac went into Eugene's room, finding exactly what he was looking for. It was a snarling little cotton ball. Ophelia watched as the little creature licked Isaac's hand, and while she thought it was so cute, she had to hold her feelings in. Afterwards, he explained that what everyone in the manor experienced were visual and auditory hallucinations not induced by magic, but instead a type of herb. And it had to do with a pet of Eugene's that had died a few months ago. The flower was called a riel. They grew from the dead bodies of unique animals. The death of this pet's body must have caused riel flowers to sprout, and pollen likely covered the entire manor. Their next step was to remove them, so Isaac and now stripped. Isaac sprayed now with water first, and everyone began to bathe. The flowers were then all picked and disposed of in a faraway location. By the end of it all, Eugene asked to marry Ophelia once he was all grown up, since she had brought Isaac here and saved his family. Trying to get over another headache she might have in the future at her table in the palace, Isaac finally told her the whole truth about the riel flowers. When he said they grew from the corpses of unique animals, what he really meant was monsters. The little cotton ball pet that belonged to Eugene was also a monster, but so harmless, he didn't do anything about it. He was afraid Eugene wouldn't be able to keep it as a pet if he told the truth. Ophelia couldn't believe that cute thing was a monster. Later, while working, she experienced a nosebleed, attributing it to the change in seasons. She received her report from the commander of the Imperial Palace's defense on 2 things. First, that public safety of the capital was fine, and second, that the medical facility she had built was being warmly welcomed by the underprivileged. The only problem was someone has been randomly killing wild animals around the town. That wasn't right though. She knew they weren't animals. Those animals must be monsters. She went to the spot with Isaac where she had seen the huge field of real flowers. The fact that there were so many of those flowers in an empty lot of the old town suggested that there were monsters in the capital and someone killed and buried them all here. But now, the entire field vanished without a trace. She wondered if Kirsten was involved in all this. Seeing blood drip from her nose again during her work, she was beginning to think her death might come before Ewout even killed her. The monster upheaval that was supposed to happen 8 years later in the original story was happening now. She wondered if her death date was being pushed forward as well. Isaac came to see her, thinking that despite saving some people at the moment, part of his heart felt frozen. He felt as though he was surrounded by countless ghosts of people he couldn't save. He felt remorse for not being able to save everyone. Regardless, he knew that no matter how courageously he lived his life, that the last ghost he'd meet was his own. He knew he'd one day die alone in a hospital or in his bed. And now here, kneeling before Ophelia, he asked her if her loneliness, agony, and empty stares had anything to do with wanting that paralyzing potion. If all she needed was someone to understand her, he'd rather fulfill that role instead. Even a glance or a small nod would be enough. If she gave him any kind of signal, he'd be there for her, by her side. Suddenly, he saw her hand fall where she lay to sleep. He called her name over and over, and getting no response, he was scared that she died. He started to shake her intensely, and she woke up, giggling, asking what was making him so frantic. Now surprised to see how distraught he was up close. He was scared, but now relieved, knowing she was just playing with him. The monster crisis was the climax of the original story in The Crown Prince's Return, and the most significant catastrophe and turning point, which leads to the death of the villainess Ophelia. In an attempt to get rid of Ewout, she ordered him to subjugate the demons as soon as they started migrating from the north. All she gave him was an old dagger and no additional support, under the guise of him needing to prove his ability as prince. She didn't stop there either, marketing herself as a sad princess who sent her only brother to combat, even creating an opera and spreading it throughout the country. It featured a rendition of a traditional Empire song called Hymn to the Queen, which was so beloved, it was also being used as the main song for a surprise event that Ewout and the other children prepared for Ophelia now. He was a bit embarrassed. But seeing the three boys put their hearts into their performance, Ophelia was quite impressed. Eugene took center, telling Ophelia to consider it his serenade, making Ewout annoyed, because Eugene had told him this was supposed to be a performance to cheer his sister up. She was glad the three boys were getting along, knowing one day they'd eventually take her place. She wanted to stop the monster crisis first, and thinking Kirsten was somehow involved, she definitely wanted to give him payback. Thinking of a plan to deal with the monsters, she continued to hum the song from earlier. Isaac came by to leave her some tea, and she apologized for startling him earlier. She just felt she needed something a little lighthearted for some giggles, and his silence provided her so much comfort. They shortly held a funeral for her father in the pouring rain. Before he passed, the head priest was doing everything he could to heal the emperor, who was threatening to burn down all the temples for being unable to heal his disease. The head maid would run to him, begging the emperor not to leave them behind, and through his panting breaths, he would tell her to bring him that illegitimate child. Ophelia would lead Ewout into the Sun Palace, and he was so nervous, he wanted to hold her hand. The emperor was not pleased seeing his daughter. Paying no regard to Ewout, he began spewing out curses that were hard to swallow. This made Ewout ghastly pale, so Ophelia dragged Ewout out of their father's chamber as he continued throwing objects at them, demanding that they listen. The emperor died at dawn, spewing hateful words and obscenities until the very end. At his funeral, Isaac was worried for Ophelia because she hadn't slept much, eaten much, and was standing in the pouring rain. He then explained Ewout told him something yesterday, after they had left the emperor's room. Ewout couldn't believe Ophelia had to deal with verbal abuse from their father every day. He knew nothing, and had even been envious of what he thought was the bond between her and their father. He was grateful for how protective she'd been towards him, regardless. Isaac sighed, and suddenly held her close. The two continued to wait under a tree like this, until the pouring rain died down. Ever since yesterday, Ophelia felt Isaac's gaze. When he held her, he had said she really had no idea what was on his mind. Now, she wanted to know what was on it. So he suddenly covered her with his cape, to tell her that yesterday, the rain was getting her clothes wet. He was just trying his best to help keep her dry. Now was the time for her coronation to be the Empire's Empress again. She'd have to work more today, and wished Ewout would just kill her now. Because the monster crisis must be avoided at all costs, tax money couldn't be wasted right now. She tried to keep the coronation ceremony as minimal as possible. Now was a bit disappointed, wanting to celebrate the festivities and enjoy free food. Ophelia, meanwhile, would have to fend off the constant fawning from aristocrats and foreign envoys. She'd rather spend the taxpayers' money on public welfare. However, her grandfather would barge in, telling her that was nonsense. They needed to celebrate for at least 3 months. He fell to the ground, having been eagerly anticipating his granddaughter's magnificent coronation, and she began to panic, trying to calm him down. Isaac would interject, telling the Duke to take notice that Ophelia hasn't been doing well, and she played her part, acting dizzy and falling into Isaac's arms. Some of that dramatic play that she learned from her grandfather. Putting his cape over her, Ophelia was giggly, pointing out the last time he covered her was because of rain, and now he was shielding her from the bright sunshine. She thought of him as a bit clingy, like a giant dog. She wished it would rain more, so he could keep behaving like this. Getting a little caught off guard by what she said, he wanted her to repeat herself. When he tried to ask if she understood why he was concerned for her health, why he constantly brought her medicinal tea, why he paid her so much attention, she just answered because he was a priest, a diligent man, and this was how he treated everyone, making him lose his mind because she had no idea how he felt. Becoming the Empress was a traumatizing task for her. She only heard the voices of her ghost, telling her Ewout was going to kill her eventually. But when Isaac was in her sight, everything became silent, covering the two of them in his cape. She teasingly told him it's like only the two of them were here. He didn't mind, telling her to do this more often if it helped her figure out what was truly on his mind. She was charmed, thinking of him as a huge, fluffy, whimpering dog. Being with him allowed her to forget everything for a short period of time. Kirsten was the root of all these problems, so why did he have to show up right as she was feeling at ease? It's like his gaze was asking her if she had no shame in acting like an ordinary person, like he wanted to know whether or not she was scared of eternal death, and now she was caught in his arms. He questioned if she developed a close relationship with that priest, and she retorted, how could she with him clinging to her like this? Did he show up this threateningly because he was curious about her relationship with Isaac? She followed him without a fuss and didn't want him to harm Isaac, so the two vanished, with the priest none the wiser. Pulling away from Kirsten, he explained most of the mana in his body has been depleted. This place helped him minimize the effects of that. That's how powerful this magic was. Pointing towards his eye color completely changed, he added that all his memories have returned as well, and that he's always been the one bringing her back to life. She couldn't believe this. He was the one who committed treason in her first life, and the one who revived her? She screamed at him to stop, but he couldn't. As long as time was rewound, she'd be stranded in the past, and her presence trapped in space. The revival magic was the reason she was immune to both magic and divine power. No one could help her. He couldn't either. She was going to be eternally reborn, and in the end, she'd never receive Prince Ewout's forgiveness. The reason the outcomes of her first life were always repeated was because the revival magic created a fixed point to bring her back to life. Ewout, now, the difficulties and betrayal would all repeat because of this. Kirsten wasn't going to make excuses for his past self, but he was sorry at the very least. He suddenly went schizo, screaming, asking what he could do for her now that his memories were back, but his mana was depleted. She tried to calm him down, not wanting to die here, telling him to start researching how to reverse the magic. He was worried he'd fail though, and felt it'd be better if they just stayed here in the subspace, where the mana's impact was limited. He told her, speak only to me, laugh only with me, and create memories only with me. A magic flashed and suddenly whacked him, and it was the painter, sarcastically asking what Ophelia found so appealing about this annoying man. These two mages were responsible for hunting demons and planting riel flowers all across the old town. Ophelia wondered why she was acting so friendly right now. The deer suddenly pushed Ophelia out, leaving her unscathed out in the fields. She then went over to Kirsten, telling him to give up on Ophelia. However, he'd insist that despite how harsh she was towards him, there was love beneath. The deer replied that the wild feelings he was experiencing was the result of the riel flowers he'd been planting non-stop. He needed to calm down, But regardless, he was insistent that he and Ophelia were deeply in love with each other, and that he couldn't give up on her. In his mind, he truly loved the princess. He told the deer that since she lived as the alter ego of Mana for 4,000 years, she wouldn't understand human passion. He began to laugh hysterically, and told her to just wait and see. Ophelia would choose him again. Ophelia eventually officially took over the empire, and during coronation, she wore an outfit made from the silk of premium silkworms, received premium handicrafts from faraway countries, and listened to never-ending music. She wondered if this whole event was the work of her grandfather or Amy. The three boys were in awe seeing her beauty, especially Eugene, calling his future bride dazzling and exquisite. She considered letting it go, since the boys were having so much fun. The celebration lasted a week. Citizens who had no interest in the previous emperor's funeral greatly appreciated the new empress's coronation. As soon as Ewout offered Ophelia flowers publicly, the people spoke of them having a great relationship full of sibling affection, and word began to spread that maybe Ophelia hadn't killed his mother. She'd give her little brother a smooch on the head, and the people cheered. On the last day, she'd surprise Ewout by telling him he would be emperor one day, and be far more loved and respected than she was. She told him to study hard and grow taller, since a tiny child emperor wasn't a very intimidating figure. And Shauna would drag him back to his room, telling him not to get too attached to his sister, that he shouldn't forgive his mother's enemy. Kirsten would appear atop the palace gates, watching them from afar with the deer in the form of a bird. She called him a lunatic stalker, asking if he was trying to replenish his mana by using Riel flowers again, and that people like him should be kept under watch. But he wouldn't listen, placing another hand of flowers within his body. He then shot a red laser towards Ewout, making a bloody pop. However, he had just killed a bird. Ophelia was now panting from anxiety, witnessing Kirsten threaten Ewout's life. So, she'd make him aware there was no way he could kill Ewout unless the revival magic was undone, because her brother was chosen by the spell to be her killer. Kirsten was determined to kill Ewout, despite the revival magic's protection and fate though. The priests of the temple were all abuzz over the beauty of the latest transcription produced by Father Isaac. The head priest called him into his office, casually asking if Isaac was keeping himself busy, trying to hide his feelings for Ophelia. Isaac turned flush, asking if he wasn't supposed to feel love, affection, and respect, causing the high priest to laugh. He told Isaac he should at least have a proper title before pursuing things further, like becoming the next high priest. Hearing Isaac refuse in mutters, the high priest could see he wasn't fighting back as much as he usually did, and that he should seize the opportunity to coerce Isaac into being the next high priest now. He suddenly put the high priest outfit onto Isaac, telling him he looked so dignified, women would come flocking. Isaac couldn't believe the high priest was talking so recklessly, since he'd been married before, and the high priest couldn't believe things were so serious for Isaac, since he was the one who brought up marriage. This caused Isaac to get more flushed, saying it was just a slip of the tongue. The high priest then tried to comfort Isaac, telling him his soft demeanor on the inside was his greatest asset. He assured Isaac since he was so handsome, everything would probably work out for him. Now stood by Ophelia while she was sleeping. He told her he dreamt about her often, about killing her, just like they agreed. She was slowly waking up as he told her he hated her. She was the one who told him to help end her life, so she shouldn't have made him fall in love with her. But he was glad he could be by her side right now. Her dreams quickly became a nightmare, with Kirsten appearing. She started to flail, and Isaac asked why no one was waking her from her nightmare. These days, all Isaac could think about was Ophelia. He considered the idea of becoming high priest, since the title would allow him to get closer to her, while being a healer was akin to being a criminal in this country. Her grandfather was preparing a ball, and many of the servants were wondering if she'd find a boyfriend there. Meanwhile, she'd lock herself in her office, telling everyone no interruptions until the day of the ball, or else they'd be executed. The Duke was really working hard for this ball though, trying to figure out which man he should give the special jewel to, because that man would be Ophelia's partner. There was an old custom in the Empire that the person who had the same accessory as the Empress at the first ball following coronation was given the honor of the first dance with Her Majesty. The first Empress was said to have met her husband that way. Ewout would suddenly interject, asking for the jewel because he wanted to be Ophelia's official partner and first ally in the Empire. Duke Sackart wondered why. knowing Ewout hated Ophelia because she murdered his mother and took away his birthright by locking him up in the tower. And for the first time, Ewout was talking back to Saccard in a way that was familiar to him. He really resembled Ophelia at this moment. By the end of a 3-hour argument, Ewout succeeded in obtaining the matching jewel, and outside, he was suddenly met by Isaac, who just happened to be getting some fresh air. Ewout had a lot of thoughts about the priest, and wanted to know how he felt about Ophelia. So, Isaac told him that she was important to him, even if his feelings weren't reciprocated. Ewout wondered if it would be alright if he let this man stay by his sister's side. Would he be able to alleviate her loneliness? At the ball, all the guys were adorned in blue jewelry, including Eugene. Wanting their chance to be her first dance partner, Ewout would arrive escorted by Isaac. His shoulder was bandaged, having hurt himself badly during morning practice. Just thinking about the ball, he hated all the men here, who just wanted to simply hold his sister's soft hands. He felt if they wanted to be considered, they should be willing to follow Ophelia to the grave, because their role should be Her Majesty's sword and shield. Ophelia made her entrance, and her beauty was angelic. She gave the boys a wink, and now Isaac was in a daze. She showed her jewel. It was known as the Hidden Angel because of the way it reflected light throughout the entire room. Ewout announced himself as Ophelia's partner, but his jewel began to fall since he had worn it during practice earlier. Seeing this, Isaac quickly grabbed and infused it with divine power. That way, no one else could step forward to dance with Ophelia, and so he pushed Ewout to dance with her. Ewout, first in line for the throne, held Ophelia's hand, causing the 2 gemstones to gleam, and all the nobility in the ballroom bowed. She started to laugh out loud because Ewout was far too nervous. As the 2 danced, he felt dizzy and out of breath, but seeing her face, he felt relief. Outside, Isaac was surprised to see Ophelia had gone after him. She was sneaking out of her own party just to see him, and jumped down to be caught in his arms. He sat her down and then showed his back, telling her to get on so she didn't hurt her feet. She got excited and climbed right on as he carried her back. A month passed, and soldiers gathered around the northern hunting grounds. They needed to increase their forces to prepare for the monster crisis, so Ophelia was looking to find some skilled people at this hunting tournament. Now arrived, having taken care of what she requested. She suddenly got close to him, and he turned away. She wondered why he wouldn't make eye contact with her. It's like he'd been avoiding her since the ball. Somewhere private, he presented the sphere of will that the late emperor left behind. Being a magic artifact, it played a recorded video using a simple spell. In it, of course, the emperor was telling the head maid that Ewout was the one true ruler of the kingdom. So, Ophelia destroyed it. Whoops. Now wondered why the emperor despised Ophelia so much. So she explained that it was because she resembled her mother, the late empress, who was superior to him in pretty much every way possible. It crushed his ego for the rest of his life, or something like that. She felt it would have been better if she never existed to begin with. She then laughed it off, saying she was just joking, but now was serious, asking if that was the reason she wanted him to kill her. He begged her to not give up on living. She knew she could live a normal life if she was just able to get rid of this revival magic and escape the pain of eternal impending death. But even if she read all the magic books in the world and came back to life thousands of times, she doubted she'd find a way to undo it. With the tournament beginning, Kirsten appeared, crows mocking him for sleeping the entire time because his mana was drained. He'd imbue himself with more real flowers, preparing to kill Prince Ewout. Looking back at the Empire's long history, hunting tournaments have often been the site of imperial family assassinations. His plan was to stab Ewout using a deadly poison to kill him instantaneously. He first shot at Ewout's horse, leading the prince away from his guards that were following. Ewout wanted to prove he could be a brother Ophelia could depend on, aiming to take down the deer. But he wasn't prepared for Kirsten to be aiming at him point blank. Kirsten was about to puncture Ewout's eye, but the arrow would suddenly be struck by lightning, burning his arm, while Ewout's horse galloped to its death. Seeing Kirsten trying to kill him, Ewout asked if he really was Kirsten or just an assassin pretending to be him. He thought there was no reason Master Kirsten would attack him, but Kirsten made it evident that he was no longer Ewout's teacher and fired more blades towards the prince. But the revival magic would protect him. Now quickly killed the crow chasing after the prince. He was here ordered to buy Ophelia time. Kirsten made his way towards them, telling now he was the person he despised second most, right after the prince. He told Now to kneel, firing an onslaught of attacks that Now dodged. But he'd still find a way to slam the assassin into the ground. Now responded with a kick, saying he knew Kirsten would be a threat to Ophelia one day, and this definitely made Kirsten angry, shouting that Now was the one who betrayed Ophelia over and over again. Of course, this was something Now had no knowledge about. Kirsten was about to end Now's life, but he'd suddenly be stopped by a mystery knight. The knight apologized to Ewout for coming late, and now Kirsten realized there was only one person who had this overwhelming force: Father Isaac. Kirsten made another attempt on the prince's life, but Isaac would use his divine power to make the mage feel like he was drowning. Ophelia had told Isaac ahead of time to come to the hunting tournament because she expected Ewout to be attacked, and now he had seized Kirsten completely. With Ophelia capturing the source of her pain, Kirsten tried to tell her she was still beautiful, but he couldn't speak since Isaac filled his lungs with divine power. He was someone she once loved dearly, but she had no problem socking him right in the face now. His punishment would be spending the rest of his life in an underground prison where the only thing he'd be allowed would be parchment and a dull pen. He'd only eat black bread and drink sewage water until he died, spending his time finding ways to end the revival magic. She didn't want to kill him immediately, since they'd just meet in the next life anyway. And if he never found an answer, she was more than happy to leave him as an imprisoned sewer rat. From now on, she'd imprison him as soon as time reset. She technically always had the advantage, since he couldn't recall his past lives immediately after rebirth. He wouldn't even know why he was being imprisoned. The best part of all this for her was that Isaac would be moving his research lab right above Kirsten's prison. So Kirsten would have to bear the humiliation of living his life right under the priest's feet. Next, she pulled out the deer's cage. Ophelia knew the deer was actually the missing head of the magic tower, but had no idea this bird was actually fake. The real one was sitting on Ewout's shoulder, but only Neu could see her for some reason. Ewout felt his shoulder was a little heavier than usual. None the wiser, the master of the magic tower was standing on top of him. Neu would later stumble on Isaac treating Ophelia, thinking maybe this was something he shouldn't be seeing. Divine power and healing magic wouldn't help her, so Isaac had to bandage her tight. She asked Isaac to look at the bird she captured, and he explained it was just an ordinary bird. Now she learned the deer had escaped. He then offered to help her find the bird she was looking for, but with her refusing, he asked her if it had to do with Kirsten. Ophelia could now see that Isaac was getting a little jealous, so she reassured him, telling Isaac that for many years, she's had to endure long, tedious nightmares. But she was able to sleep these days because of him, because he appeared at the end of her dreams. The two then held each other close to embrace and comfort. Meanwhile, while Neu was running back, he noticed Ewout getting dragged by the bird somewhere, but had no interest in getting involved with that. He decided to instead help treat Philip, and that's when the deer spotted the ring. She used Ewout's body to fire a shot and shattered the mana ring, finally revealing to Neu that his big brother had been by his side the entire time, while Kirsten was able to obtain the magic from the ring. Ophelia watched the mana escape from the artifact, heading into the tent where Kirsten was detained. Neu wanted to know more about his brother being with him the entire time, but Ophelia knew this was not the time to explain. She was suddenly trapped within a barrier, and everyone else around was frozen in time because of the deer. And that's when she considered eliminating Isaac, now that he was defenseless. She also had Ewout on her shoulder. She thought to let him borrow hers, since she borrowed his earlier. The deer soon transformed, taking on a form that she hoped was more suitable for Ophelia's taste. The deer felt like he owed Ophelia, since he broke the ring that belonged to her of his own accord. He gave Ewout back and sent Kirsten far away. Ophelia wondered if he was an enemy or an ally. That evening, with now coming out bandaged from his injuries, he spotted Isaac and Ophelia together. The deer thought to make this encounter more romantically interesting and used his magic to make Isaac start grabbing onto Ophelia. He made Isaac pull his face close to hers, while Isaac was telling her to run. The deer was getting bored, so he decided to pull Now into this to create a two-man situation, and Now was heating up with embarrassment. They were all released from the magic an hour later. Back at the palace, things were awkward between Now and his brother. Ophelia returned to her room, finding Now shirtless and lying on her bed. He was here to flex a bit of his might, demanding Ophelia raise the budget of the magic tower, since many of the mages were using books and scrolls for pillows. Jokes aside, he explained he broke the ring to give Kirsten some of his mana back. This gave her a memory of when Ophelia first obtained the ring, but she couldn't remember who gave it to her. Regardless, the deer was here to repay his debt in breaking the ring, and he planned to repay it in a special way. Having snacks together, he showed her monsters came in all different shapes and sizes. And even though the projection of the monster he was showing her now was horrifying, there were still entities much bigger than this. He was offering to help fix the magic barrier in the north, which was the cause of the monster invasion that happened every time. Ophelia, the deer, Isaac, and Now set off on their journey towards the icy cold northern mountains, a place where Kirsten was passed out. In the mountains, Ophelia was relaying her plans to Now and Isaac. The closer they got to the barrier, the more monsters they had to deal with. She suspected Kirsten's goal was to cause chaos, since the revival magic couldn't deal with tremendous disturbances in world order. And with the magic weakened, he'd use it this time to kill Ewout. He'd kill tens of thousands of people to help accomplish this goal, and Kirsten was doing just that. First, by getting Shauna to show Ewout a copy of the Emperor's will, the message where the prince was to inherit the throne. Ewout finally acknowledged that it felt like there were two versions of himself, one part of him that trusted his own judgment and loved his sister, and another part that appeared through headaches and was consumed by a terrible hatred for her. He told Shauna to shut up and stop cheering as he ran out of the room. Then, he was met by a maid who claimed to have been by his side the entire time. And this maid tried her best to convince Ewout his hatred of Ophelia was justified, telling Ewout to despise her, loathe her, and hate her. But Ewout would break through, shouting he would always be on his sister's side. And that's when Kirsten unveiled his disguise, telling Ewout he didn't believe him. He called Ewout a liar over and over. Showing the prince the northern mountains, he explained Ophelia's secret was coming back to life repeatedly, and that every time, without fail, Ewout was the one who killed her. Kirsten threw Ewout off of a mountain, and Ewout accepted this, wanting to die so he could save his sister. But she would appear after him on horse with the deer, jumping to save her dear brother. Kirsten couldn't believe she arrived so quickly and knew the deer had set this up. With the two siblings holding hands during freefall, Ophelia promised her brother they'd get through this together. Back at camp, Now had just returned from hunting nearby monsters. He'd been killing armies of them solo, and Isaac handed him a drink to keep him refreshed. Inside their tent, Isaac found a box Ewout had given to his sister. It contained a warp scroll, an artifact that the prince wanted his sister to use to escape if things went bad. Not knowing she was immune to magic, Isaac decided to activate it at this moment, and Now would walk into the tent, pissed because Isaac was the one who told him they should wait patiently for Ophelia's return. Ophelia was lucky her outfit saved their fall by getting caught on a branch, and as luck would have it, Isaac would show up here to save them. He held Ophelia close, and even though she was frantic, since nothing was going as planned, he kissed her on this beautiful snowy mountain. Kirsten had to watch as his eyes welled up. He was sad because she loved him once too, and he couldn't understand why Ophelia would betray him. All he could do was watch, because today onward, no matter how many times she came back to life, the princess would never choose him. Kirsten was misguided. Ophelia gave up her hatred of Ewout because she didn't want to feel that way towards her family. So he took it on. Kirsten willingly carried that crushing weight on her behalf. The deer then knocked him out. He was done. The master of the magic tower didn't want to meddle in trivial human affairs anymore. After returning to camp, the deer would take Ophelia on horse, and they'd make their way to go repair the barrier. It was all a trap though. Ophelia's constant revival was sapping the world of its mana, and now the deer released Kirsten, wanting him to absorb Ophelia's mana so he could take over as guardian. Kirsten was prepared to do it, knowing this would allow him to be with Ophelia forever. There was a big explosion at the barrier, and monsters were fiercely pouring out. The soldiers found Ophelia buried under the snow, and she woke up next to Ewout. She could see he was in a lot of pain, and Isaac surmised that the powerful mana from the barrier breaking was leading Ewout to have a mental breakdown. But with her brother waking up, she felt a lot of relief. Back at home, Ophelia was feeling weak. The revival magic was consuming enormous amounts of mana, trying to rewrite the world's history. Everyone was desperately fighting off the monsters while Ophelia remained at the palace. Kirsten appeared at the window of the room Ewout was recovering in, and she let him in. knowing she couldn't resist Kirsten since he was all-powerful right now. Kirsten pulled out his sword. He was here to kill her to reverse time. He was going to restore the world's mana using Riel flowers and go back to before he cast the spell of endless revival on her, before when she was still in love with him. Then he'd leave the Empire and the Magic Tower behind, and they could run away together. The Ophelia from the past would surely come with him. Now that the revival magic has weakened, Kirsten just needed to have Ewout think a single thought of hatred towards Ophelia, and he could kill her. But Ewout could not hate his sister, thus she couldn't be killed. Isaac suddenly barged in, and Kirsten tried to end it all by jumping out of the window. Realizing his plans were over, Isaac and Ophelia would save him, and she was especially sympathetic towards Kirsten's brother, at least wanting Kirsten to say goodbye if he was going to do this. However, in Kirsten's eyes, she was his only family. After everything was over, Ophelia felt a wave of relief. Things were not completely at peace though, because Ewout wanted to know if she truly killed his mother. And now, she was panicking, having no idea what to do. Isaac was curious as well. She's been living as Ophelia for so long that it felt distant now. But she was reborn as the Villainess from a fantasy novel where Ewout was the protagonist. The original Villainess, Ophelia, in the story killed Ewout's mother. Not her. She knows she didn't kill Sitara, but was scared her explanation would still lead to misunderstandings. To this, Isaac gave Ophelia a light smooch, and she wondered what he was doing. She was trying to seriously think things through right now. It was all over. Kirsten's been captured, and Ewout didn't hate her. The revival magic lost its power because the concentration of magic was weakened, and no matter where she hid, Isaac always found her. She was still worried, however, asking his advice on what she should tell Ewout. Seeing her change expression so quickly only made him think of her as cute. He gave her a light kiss to try to distract her again. Then suddenly, they spotted Kirsten wandering about when he was supposed to be detained. The two decided to follow him, knowing there wasn't much he could do, since his existence was fading from the lack of mana. In town, Arsad grabbed at his brother, tears falling from his face as Kirsten left him behind. The mage chose the temple as his final resting place. And with Ophelia following him in, he gave her the same flowers he'd given her when they were wed at this church. As he was dying, he decided to give his mana to Didir, asking that she use it to restore the broken magical barrier, to hopefully redeem the final moments her wretched student brought to this world, and gave his final goodbyes to Ophelia. Back at home, Ophelia told Ewout she didn't kill his mother. She understood the truth of him asking her was rooted in him wanting them to embrace love as siblings. He didn't care what anyone said anymore. He just wanted them to be a loving family. Eventually, Ophelia legalized healers as a profession, so Isaac was glad, since he could finally leave the capital as an official healer. This made Ophelia sob a bit, but she told him, "Wow, that sounds amazing." He was now scratching his head, telling her this was the part where she was supposed to tell him not to go. If he were to go anywhere, he wanted it to be with her. She then tugged at his shirt, telling Isaac she wanted to live a happy, long, full life now because of him, and asked if he'd hold on to her from now on. He was so surprised at how forward she was being. 9 years later, Lady Dryton would tell Neu she was giving him the honor of escorting her to Ewout's birthday celebration. Her hair color was similar to Ophelia's, yet slightly different, and eyes the color of amethyst. He was a little nervous, telling her he thought it'd be better if someone else escorted her, since he was just an employee at the apothecary. This made her so angry, she slapped him. His face was throbbing when he'd later tell 17-year-old Ewout he had no idea why she hit him. Ewout thought it was strange, since there have been rumors all over that she actually liked Neu. Neu didn't know what that was about, and Ewout wasn't going to let their spout stop Neu from coming to his birthday. Ophelia would later visit Neu at his job. He was working as a healer in training, and even though Dryden had features that resembled Ophelia, his heart was set on the Empress. But his crush would never be requited, of course, since she only saw him as a little brother. When he asked her what love was, she brought up Lady Dryton. He was losing his mind, but she had also heard he liked Dryton for a while now. They then heard someone knocking the door of the apothecary, and a boy slapped Neu in the face. As the eldest son of the Herald family, he was here to defend Dryton's honor. He couldn't stand Neu trampling over her heart. Sir Harold, who was just inducted as a member of the Order of Imperial Knights, was challenging Neu to a duel. Ophelia was excited, thinking this was a battle of love, where Dryton was in the center. The chief of the apothecary, Isaac, then made his entrance. He threw away a bright future as the next high priest to settle down, taking on the role of a healer. Neu was a little jealous, knowing Isaac was the Empress's only lover. Isaac was just here to watch, to make sure after this duel that neither of the boys got infected wounds. Neu was originally planning to lose on purpose, but decided to go all out, seeing Ophelia was cheering for him. And now, seeing Ophelia, even Drayton could tell Neu was actually crushing on her. Going up to Ophelia after his victory, the only thing Neu received was head pats. The Empress then took her leave to go start paperwork again. Ewout was cocky, teasing Neu for finally coming to terms with his feelings, but made it evident that Ophelia's favorite could only be him, her beloved brother. Later, Isaac would tell Ophelia and Ewout he'd be leaving town to attend his sister's wedding. Ophelia snuck out to meet him at dawn, skipping out on her duties, wanting to see the town he grew up in. Arriving, his sister would beat him up a little, since he hadn't visited for the last 10 years. And she was stunned seeing Ophelia, comparing her to a beautiful fairy. She couldn't believe this woman was the one Isaac was writing about in his letters to her, and wondered if there was something wrong with Ophelia's eyesight. Privately, at an inn, his sister asked Ophelia, even though they dated for 10 years, why haven't they married yet? Ophelia would later fixate on this by herself. Having learned from his sister that he's wanted to marry her for a long time, he'd suddenly bonk her head and took Ophelia to his father's grave. They paid their respects, and she grabbed his hand, asking him to marry her. Even though she was duty-bound to the Empire, she wanted to make his 10-year wish come true. And he was so happy, he held her, telling her she couldn't take this back later. He truly loved her for who she was. The following day, Ophelia surprised Isaac's sister and fiancé with beautiful wedding decorations, and the two had a happy marriage. Ewout rushed on carriage personally to pick up his sister, since things were going awry without her looking things over at the palace. The people noticed the special imperial flag that only one carriage was allowed to display. And with Ophelia giving them warm goodbyes, they all fell over, realizing she was the Empress. Ophelia and Isaac would kiss on their ride back, and the two would have a future filled with love forevermore. Alright, not a bad ending, but man, was the second half of this story a slog to get through. I cut out a lot of useless parts, but the beginning of this story was so interesting. Then they started throwing in random plot devices like the concept of the magic barrier summoning the monsters, but also almost didn't show any of the monsters in panel. This story had tons of missed opportunities, so moving forward, I'll make sure I cover much better ones. Subscribe for more content, but for now, watch this next video. It's me, ComfyTea. I'll see you all in the next one.